This is the Keys to the Kingdom podcast, where we explore how the psychedelic renaissance becomes accessible to everyone. I'm your host, Tammy Sanders, and I'm glad you're with us. Thanks so much for listening. In this episode, Stephen Huang walks through how he came to intertwine psychedelics from his personal life with the work of his professional life in Silicon Valley. Stephen's career includes stints at Facebook, Square, and Culture Amp, where he first stepped into the work of diversity, equity, and inclusion. As Stephen tells it, psychedelics have unlocked his superpowers as a DEI professional, and in our conversation, he shares his deep sense of obligation to destigmatize and normalize psychedelics so professionals, leaders, and marginalized people all have access to the same healing tools. Stephen, thanks so much for joining me. It's really great to have you.
Thrilled to be here.
We've had some prep, and as I've encountered you and gotten to know you a little bit, I'm really surprised by the poster that's behind you of harder, better, faster, stronger. Like, you don't strike me as a harder, better, faster, stronger kind of personality. What's that about?
It's Daft Punk.
Oh, that's right. The helmet. The helmet. Yes, the helmet.
So I grew up in a house with not a ton of music. My parents didn't play a lot of music. So it was me and my brother downloading things from Napster. And I just remember
that's back in the day.
Back in the day. Daft Punk was, my brother's 4.5 years older. So he set the tone. And I just fell in love with Daft Punk. I've always been a fan. I got this poster around Christmas. So it's May. So like 5 months ago-ish. Mm-hmm. And then they disbanded officially a few months later. So I feel like it's memorialized. And I'm calling you from my home office / home gym. So I needed art that spoke to work harder, faster, and also better and stronger.
Yeah, I like that. Also, didn't Daft Punk do the song with the lyrics, "Don't you worry, child, heaven's got a plan for you"?
No, that's Swedish House Mafia.
Okay, got it. Okay.
And they did disband, but I'm pretty sure they're going to come back for some like tour because they're all making so much money. I think they're going to come back.
Gotcha. Okay. So you really have your finger on the pulse of all this, it seems like.
And I'm sure we'll go into this, but electronic music is really kind of what led me in a lot of ways to psychedelics. Like,
really,
I think these things are really like a similar piece. Like, I think of like a DNA strand with like psychedelics and electronic music really going hand in hand for me. And I think
let's talk about that now. Tell me more about that. This is really interesting. Tell me more.
Yeah, I mean, so have you ever been to a rave?
I have not. Raves came after my time. So I'm a Gen Xer. And we weren't, if you were raving as a Gen Xer, you really needed to pull your life together.
Yeah. You know what I mean? I love raves and music festivals. And actually, I love that I'm able to tell this story because people are always asking, oh, how did you get into DEI? That's like what every DEI person gets asked on the podcast, and they have the story of like how they cared about social justice, et cetera. I always cared about social justice. That was always an important thing for me. And when I say DEI, I mean diversity, equity, and inclusion. Mm-hmm. At the time I was working at Facebook, I had a career in analytics, and my career has always been in the analytics path. Mm-hmm. And I remember being at a festival called Electric Daisy Carnival. It's a big festival. It's in Vegas. We're talking 100,000 people plus. And I'm in this big crowd. I'm on LSD. I'm probably on MDMA, probably a little stoned too. I was just like layering it all on that day. And
you had a very, very busy day.
It's at night.
LSD and MDMA and cannabis is a very busy day, Stephen. And I just want to say, for anyone who's listening, I don't necessarily recommend having a day that's that busy.
This is like a once in a year kind of thing at this festival.
Gotcha.
But I had an epiphany, and it was like just feeling a deep, deep sense of belonging in that moment. When you're at a rave, everyone's, well, at this one, everyone's dressed up in outfits. We're all here to see this DJ. We're all dancing. Everyone's loving on each other. You know, someone opens up like a pack of gum, like, who wants gum? And you just kind of offer gum to the strangers around you. And you go to the vendor, you get a Gatorade, but you get 5 Gatorades, and you kind of pass Gatorades to strangers on the way back to your spot. And that's just the vibe of the rave. Tony Hsieh, who recently passed, but he was a big advocate for the rave culture in the workplace. He talked about PLUR, peace, love, unity, and respect. These are kind of the components of the rave. And doing psychedelics at raves is really what sparked this, like, oh, this is what this inclusion thing is all about. This is actually what I want to do with my life. What if the world could be more like this? What if the workplace could feel more like what I'm feeling right now? And it was a powerful enough moment that really shifted the arc of my life and career.
Yeah. It's interesting because it sounds like you came to psychedelics quite recreationally. So it wasn't necessarily that you had this intention around healing or therapeutic use. It really was just around joy and the experience of joy and connectedness for you. And then there's this translation of that feeling of joy and connectedness out of recreation and into your professional life.
Have you read Carl Hart's Drug Use for Grownups?
Everybody on the planet, it seems like, has read Carl Hart's Drug Use for Grownups in 2021. That is the book to read in 2021 right now.
It's good. He talks about how, drug use is really about just the pursuit of happiness. And isn't that something that we are all entitled to? And I have used it for healing. But I think we don't need to exclusively use it for that. Like, we all deserve to experience joy. And to expand and interrogate our own minds and ways of thinking. So I think drug use for recreation is just as good of a reason to advocate for psychedelics as, psychedelics for healing.
Now I'm going to play devil's advocate here.
Please.
But doesn't that lead us on a slippery slope, Stephen? Isn't it dangerous to be using drugs for recreation? And if you have to use drugs for recreation, isn't there something maybe that you're missing or that's wrong with your life? I mean, shouldn't you be able to get to joy and recreation without substances?
Yeah. So I definitely think, absolutely, drugs are not universally good for everyone in every situation. But they can certainly be used to improve your mood in your day. When used responsibly, much like cannabis, but also much like all of the other things that we use to bring us joy. I think of a lot of technology, is Netflix really good for humankind? Yes, I think telling diverse stories and entertainment is in itself a very valid purpose, but do we lose a lot of sleep and we're spending a lot of time watching the screens? Yeah, there are downsides to every recreational activity.
Yeah. It's interesting when I think about drug use and substance use. I certainly had, I think, unconsciously taken in a message that if I was using drugs, then there was something wrong. And then I started using psychedelics and found them profoundly helpful for my life. And now have shifted to thinking about, well, what is my relationship with substances, and what kind of relationships do I want to have with substances, and how could those relationships with substances actually expand my life in all kinds of ways? And now I find myself, in 2018, I wasn't using anything, and now I'm using lots of things, and pretty insistent that I want to be using these things forever. So yeah, I kind of do wish that raves had come along when, I was a teenager, for example.
And I also want to I've been thinking a lot about how so much of our social interaction revolves around alcohol and how alcohol is so easily abused. And I'm wouldn't it be nice if we didn't have to go to drinking to do this? That is the default social situation in circles of friends and also in business. It seems to revolve around alcohol. And I abused alcohol a lot growing up. I think a lot of that's like part of the American,
Same here.
college experience.
Yeah, same here. Same here. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I don't know. I stopped drinking really when I started doing psychedelics more kind of in my mid 20s. And I was realizing, even though it was, recreational at first, it did give me a moment to look back on how I used and abused alcohol.
Mm,
And I think I was doing it to just allow myself to be gay in public.
mm,
Like before, you repress a lot of things and you're like, I'm queer, but I'm just gonna like kind of keep it in. And that wears on you. And alcohol was like a release for me.
mhm.
So I kind of drank to get drunk.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And after doing, LSD a few times, I was like, I don't need to do that. I
Yeah.
can be myself naturally and remember the conversations and not have a hangover the next day. And at some point, I just stopped drinking. I just kind of turned it off.
Yeah. I hear a step in there that maybe was forgotten, but you tell me if I'm telling too much of your story for you.
Go for it.
I heard you say, I drank to get drunk, but I think a lot of people get drunk to be free.
Yeah.
And once you are free, you no longer need to drink or do anything to, to get to that freedom. And I
Yeah.
do think for me, psychedelics has helped me arrive at freedom. And now I can stay here on my own. I don't necessarily do psychedelics to be free. I did psychedelics and they helped me to get to freedom, but now I'm here.
That's
Now
a
I'm here.
beautiful articulation of it.
Right.
Was
I
there a
will keep.
moment for you, or was it like, a period of time? Like for me, I think some of my arcs, I'm like, okay, during that time, psychedelics helped me. And then there are specific moments where I was like, it was that year at that spot where I had this moment.
Mm, mm. Yeah, that's an interesting question to ponder. I think for me, it definitely has been a process to
Mm,
freedom. Like coming to freedom has been a process. There have been a lot of things I've had to shed.
mm,
So, I came to psychedelics out of a PTSD diagnosis.
mm,
So certainly had to shed that because PTSD does not let you be free. But then once, I was able to get to a place where I really felt like I could shed this PTSD. I didn't have to carry this anymore. Then it was sort of wide open, like, wow, well, okay, well, who could I be? And
yeah.
starting to explore that, I think that's when I started to feel, oh, this might be what freedom's like. Like
Mm,
now I'm open. Now there's possibility. Now I can go see what's out there, and I
mhm,
can go see what's in me. Like this is
mhm.
really this is getting interesting now. Right, this is getting good. Right, so I think that for me is just sort of this process over the last 2.5 years of shedding these legacy burdens and then stepping into possibility. The combination of those two realities for me is what I feel freedom is.
That. And I'm excited for more people as we, through this podcast and through this movement, start to destigmatize these drugs. Some people, really refer to it as medicine for more people, because there are so many more people that want to be on the same journey and path that we've been on over the past few years.
Yeah.
They know where they want to go, but they're like just short, or they're missing that strategy to get there, to unlock it, to ignite this thing. And I'm like, there are tools for that. There's meditation and coaching and practice. There are, really truly organic, no psychedelics needed ways to get there. But there's also this tool that is available, can be used safely and responsibly, that people should be aware of.
Yeah, and it's not an either or. Like it does
Yeah.
not have to be an either or. At least for me, it's the way that I engage psychedelics now and the way that I will continue to engage psychedelics is in concert with all these other aspects of my life. Right?
Mm.
If I'm exercising and riding my bike and connecting with my friends and family and being of service in the world and having a 5-MeO DMT journey and going to therapy and do like it's all part of the collective of being healthy, being whole, and developing what I call mental wealth for myself.
I love that.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of conversation about mental health. But I'm starting to talk now with people about mental wealth and what that looks like for people. What do you think when you hear that, when you hear the term mental wealth?
When I think wealth, I think generational wealth. Like when I think wealth, I think about like this this force that I can like pass down and ensure like safety and freedom for my like my bloodline, like my future kids.
Mm.
And so I think like wealth and wealth building and generational wealth is so important to think about. Like it sucks that we live in this like capitalist system, but when you think about who benefits from this, it's people that can create generational wealth and pass it down. So when I think mental wealth, I think, you know, you can very much pass down intergenerational trauma. That's exactly what that happens. So when I think about mental wealth, I think about like becoming a whole mentally healthy and wealthy person that benefits your children and your children's children.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I had not thought about the term generational mental wealth. And now I'm going to think about nothing else for the rest of the week. I really appreciate that.
We got generations of trauma to heal.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Why not have generations of mental wealth to pass on and to share? That's powerful. You know, Stephen, you and I are both, at least currently, you know, I have a day job in tech, and you also have a pretty extensive tech background, but we didn't start in tech, right? I don't think you started off your professional career expecting to be in tech, and I certainly didn't. I'm wondering how you came to tech, but more importantly, I'm wondering why you came to tech, because I know, like, I have a very specific reason for why I came to tech, and I think it was very subconscious, and I didn't realize, oh, this is why I came here, until I was kind of in it, and then I really understood what I was after. So but before I share that, I'm very interested. Why did you come to tech?
I don't know if my reason is going to be as like well thought out or solid as yours. I am
you
someone
should
who doesn't.
just put it on the table. Let's see what happens.
All right,
I bet you it's going to be better than you think.
I graduated in 2009 from undergrad, and
right after right in the midst of the financial crisis. Welcome.
Yeah, it was fun. So I wanted, you know, in college I was thinking, okay, I'll go to like maybe McKinsey or Bain or BCG or one of these like, you know, strategy consulting firms. I had like a 3.5 GPA from a small D3 college, Babson College. I went abroad my senior year, first semester. And so when I came back, I had no internet or TV. So when I came back, they're like, oh, we're in a recession now. It's like, oh, so is Bain hiring?
Wait, you went away and had no internet or television, and so you did not know that the US was in a major recession when you came back.
No, not really.
That's phenomenal, Stephen. That's phenomenal. I don't know why, but that just makes me adore you even more. Okay, so you come back, there's a major recession, and your question is, what, you're not hiring?
Yeah, I was like, well, you know, Accenture, Deloitte, or like someone will be hiring. And a 3.5 from Babson College, it's like everything's on a curve there. That's a good GPA. You know, that is like top decile or top quartile. But on paper, it's like, who is this kid? No, I was getting rejection letters within like 24 hours. So like, we're not hiring. I actually had an internship my junior year as a life insurance actuary. Or it was a property casualty insurance actuary, so like a car, home, and then I hated it. I actually got fired because I would finish my work early and be like, all right, anything else? No? Okay, cool. I'm gonna go shopping, or I'm gonna like go take a nap or something. I don't know. I had some lessons to learn, obviously.
For folks who are just on audio, I am dying laughing over here.
So it was like, okay, you need to get a job. Otherwise it's like back to mom and dad's basement, you know, like what's it going to be? So I was a life insurance actuary for a few years. And if you know anything about the actuarial path, you have to take these exams and they require lots of hours of studying. And it's a very regimented path to success. I remember doing some actuarial calculations. You calculate when people die. That was my job. And just feeling, was I unhappy? I had a group of friends. I had a career. I wasn't one to complain when the world was in a recession, but I wasn't happy either. You know,
this does not calculating when people are going to die does not sound like enlivening work. Now, I'm not saying it's not necessary work, because I just had my beloved third mama passed away last year. She died May 30th, 2020, and insurance saved the day, right? I'm glad that she had a bunch of insurance. Insurance is very useful. So we are certainly not trying to disparage the importance of that, but
Right.
it sounds like that work did not enliven you.
It wasn't my calling,
Yeah.
you know. Accidental death and dismemberment, AD&D, was one of my specialties.
Yeah.
And when you're a 22-year-old, 21-year-old, you have all these dreams and passions of doing something bigger.
Yeah.
I did acid for the first time around then. And it was incredible.
How so? How so? People say that, but there may be people listening here who don't know what that means. Like, and I will say, whenever anyone ever said to me, I did acid, I couldn't hear anything you said after that, because acid was stuff that made people crazy. So whatever you said about you did acid, my brain just immediately shut down and refused to believe whatever you might say about it. I could not take in that this was something that actually would be useful for a human being to do. So when you say I did acid for the first time and it was incredible, what does that actually mean? Like, if you're speaking to that Tammy who used to have major roadblocks around acid and LSD, what would you say?
Just do it.
But it's gonna make me crazy, Stephen. No, I'm not doing it.
I know. Okay. My first experience was I was just so willing to try. I didn't even know what it was. So like, maybe I'm not a good model.
You're not making a good case. You're like, I don't know what it was. I just did this thing. Like, what were you thinking? What was going on for you?
I feel like I just tried cocaine like a few months before that. I'm like, okay, that was fun. So now I'm in this mindset of like, I'm willing to try new things.
Gotcha. So you're open, it's recreational, you're having a good time.
Yeah. And I just remember having like the best night of my life. It was, I was, the set and the setting was perfect. I was with a group of friends. I think I was the only person doing it. So maybe that's not, I don't know. I was just in such an open place. I was, walking distance from where I was living, so I could always walk home. And it was just, I felt free. There was one moment we were walking up the stairs to this bar that we always went to. And I had like a little bit of an out-of-body experience. I was watching myself walk up the stairs with my friends. I don't know what I was thinking at that moment, but it was just like, there's like an alternate reality almost. And maybe in seeing that alternate reality or being out of my body, it just allowed me to reimagine or rethink or like imagine that there's a different reality and future for me. I didn't have to go and take all these actuarial exams and do this path. I could create and craft a new way forward for myself.
Yeah, you can design your life. Like if you could see your life as varied realities that are constructed, then you can construct a reality that you actually want to live.
That's it. Okay. And maybe I didn't realize it in that moment, but that night shifted my perspective on a lot of things. So I was using Facebook at the time, and this was back then. You actually applied to Facebook on Facebook. It was like some window pops up. Do you want a job? We're hiring. And I said, well, I can calculate when people die, so I can calculate when people will leave a company. When you're calculating death, it's like smoker, non-smoker. If you're calculating when someone is leaving a company, it's probably like engineer, salesperson. How good is their manager? How engaged are they? What was their last performance review? And in my head, it was the same math mathematical principles that I could use and apply it. It's a bit of a stretch, but the people at Facebook.
I would say, yeah, I would say not. I would say not. I mean, you're essentially, you're saying there's a set of motivators that can help you understand an outcome. I just need to figure out what the motivators are, and then I can plug them into this formula and get to an outcome.
Google is doing it. Google is one of the first companies to do this kind of predictive attrition modeling in HR. And at this point in Facebook's growth, they were like, what is Google doing? We need to do that. They were trying to steal all the Google engineers. And
Gotcha.
so I was like, I can do that. You should hire me. So I was the first HR analyst at Facebook. And that's kind of how I got into tech. So I wasn't so much planning to get into tech. It was like, I want to get out of Hartford, Connecticut, where there were no gay bars, you know, and just get to a place that would be more accepting. My brother had moved to San Francisco a year before that. I'm from the West Coast. And when I moved to San Francisco and worked at Facebook, that is when I started to fall in love with tech and the ability to have a big impact and shape, you know, the way that we experience the world.
Yeah, and shape the future for sure. That was a very interesting story, Stephen. It's way more interesting maybe to hear it than maybe it is for you to tell it because you lived it. But I hear a pretty profound evolution there that to some degree, if it wasn't instigated, but it certainly was spurred on by psychedelics.
Yeah.
Right.
When I'm meeting people, I'm always asking, what is the role that psychedelics have played in your life? Because for me, there are periods or specific trips that have really shifted, like my arc.
Yep. Do you find, or have you found more inflection points like that with psychedelics, shifting your arc? I mean, that's a pretty big one that, you know, psychedelics shifted who I am professionally. Would there be any more that you would call out? I can jump in too, but are there any more that you would call out?
Moving to tech and moving to Facebook was one. Changing careers from analytics to like DEI is another one. And then I guess kind of the third major one is just realizing that psychedelics needs to be more of my career. So now I call myself a diversity, equity, inclusion, and psychedelics practitioner.
Okay. And what does it mean to be, for you, a DEI and psychedelics practitioner? What does that mean for you?
Yeah, still exploring it, still figuring it out.
And I think you're the first one.
Am I? I think there are others that are maybe underground. That maybe I'm just the first public person about it.
Yeah, I mean, who like go find a LinkedIn profile for me that says DEI and psychedelics practitioner. Go, you know what I'm saying? Like that's.
I'll try. I'll give a hunt. To me, I see two things. So I see the diversity, equity, and inclusion industry needing new strategies to rethink how we're doing things. You know, we put up billions of dollars into this kind of industry and movement, and we're not seeing the kind of ROI or returns or progress that we would like. So I'm thinking psychedelics can help the DEI industry reshape and rethink how we want to bring people together. And we know psychedelics can do that. I also see the psychedelics industry as one that is growing and likely going to fall into some of the similar traps that the cannabis industry did, where predominantly straight, white, able-bodied cis men are going to have the funding and privilege to profit off of this at the expense of BIPOC and indigenous communities that have been doing this real work for, you know, centuries. And so the psychedelics world needs some DEI work, and the DEI industry needs some psychedelics components. And maybe this is a symbiotic, beautiful relationship that needs to happen.
Yeah. Are you finding people talking more openly in tech about psychedelics? Now, you know, I know I think there's been a couple things on Netflix about microdosing, and you know, there's sort of, I think, maybe cultural talk about the prevalence of psychedelics in tech, but I don't see it in my professional life. I certainly don't talk about psychedelics at my day job. I'm wondering the degree to which you've seen this confluence of psychedelics in tech in your professional life.
It is talked about, but I feel like in small circles. and the people that are allowed to talk about it are the privileged people within the community, where they get to celebrate their use and say that that's how they got this advantage or have this focus. But as we're seeing in the news, if you come from an underrepresented group, one that's being targeted or marginalized by a predominantly white group, that the rules aren't the same for you. So
Yeah.
I think that's why we're seeing some groups be able to talk about it, but most groups are scared to.
Yeah. And what we're speaking about here specifically is just recently here in May 2021, a CEO, Justin Su, of a company called Iterable, was fired from a company that he co-founded. And the reason for his firing was that he had, I think, taken LSD in 2019. He had microdosed on LSD in 2019. And so this was given as a reason for his firing. Meanwhile, you have, Steve Jobs, who was celebrated and emulated for using LSD to make Apple one of the most successful product-oriented companies that has ever existed. So, we're not here to speculate about Justin's situation at Iterable, and I don't want to traffic in hearsay. I do simply find it curious that Steve Jobs is this CEO who openly espoused the utility of psychedelics for himself and for Apple, but Justin was fired for microdosing 18 months ago. I do have a sense, at least for myself, that there's stratification there. And we are constantly talking in tech about meritocracy and how you succeed based on meritocracy. But I've just not seen that really play out as reality. I wonder what your thoughts and experience have been around that.
Yeah. I mean, the meritocracy myth within tech is one of the most insidious ones. I think.
Yeah, I think that's I think bold and true. The meritocracy myth in tech.
Yeah.
The meritocracy myth in tech.
Yeah.
Can you talk about, from your perspective, why you think it's insidious?
Because we all want meritocracy. I think every group wants that. We want to be judged by our skills and our abilities and not by our identity. And I like tech espouses a lot of like egalitarian and idealistic beliefs that no one would argue with. But I think the myth is that that tech is already a meritocracy, when it's not. We have to strive to achieve it. And to me, it's so insidious because it's so plainly obvious to see that it's not a meritocracy. Okay, so whatever, 95, 97%, right, of VCs are like white men. It's like, if we were a meritocracy, would that be the case?
Well, maybe. I mean, it's a very diverse group of white men.
Oh.
Right? Some of them might have glasses, some of them might not. Some of them might be blonde, some of them might be brown haired, some of them might come from Stanford, some of them might come from non-Stanford. I mean,
some might be John, some might be Bill, some might be Will.
So yeah, it is interesting that that for me, the insidiousness of the myth is that if tech is a meritocracy, then what do we need all this DEI work for? Right? We're already there. We're already at the destination.
And we take, we kind of confuse, lose signals in the noise kind of thing, where it's like, well, this person went to Harvard, so they must be smart. It's like, chances are they are, but let's not forget that colleges and the whole institutions around education have bias built into them. So we're relying on all of these bias signals. And they're signals. Yes, people from Harvard are smart, but, that's assuming that, opportunity is equally distributed. It's not. Talent is equally distributed. If we were a meritocracy, we would see, people in leadership and people in power at the same proportion of the world, because talent is equally distributed, but the opportunities aren't. And that's why we see this imbalance. So we do not have a meritocracy right now.
Yeah. And then for me, there's this interesting confluence of the meritocracy myth and the illegality of psychedelics,
Mm,
which can opportunistically be weaponized
totally.
for some situations. So, I think it's why, like, some of us who already know that, the rules are different for us than
Mhm.
they are for, people of different identity, also for people of different roles in tech. The
Mhm.
roles are not equally, I think,
Yes.
equally appreciated as well. Like an engineer, I have seen engineers get away with behavior that is just abominable. You would not do that as any other kind of employee
Yeah.
anywhere. But because you're an engineer and engineers are so prized,
Mm,
they can behave however they want to behave.
mm.
So if an engineer is microdosing on LSD and is a top performing engineer, that's very different than someone in people ops
Yep.
microdosing on LSD and wanting to talk about that with
Oh
everyone,
yeah. The
right?
rules are very different.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. I've noticed it in the culture. I'm thinking back to my Facebook days. One of our rules was move fast and break things. That was very like, that value was really on a pedestal, but it wasn't equally distributed. Like if you're an engineer, yes, the more breaking you can do, like go for it. Like a new hire, shuts down Messenger for an hour and it's like celebrated, like wow, like epic fuck up. But if someone in people ops did that, and I think one of the reasons I got my job is they had an inexperienced analyst who like shared someone's compensation or shared a compensation spreadsheet on accident, and they're like, we need someone with better Excel skills. You make a mistake in HR, not
You're
the
out.
same.
Yeah. It's not, the rules are not applied the same. And so I think that, that's why we have these narratives around psychedelics and their danger.
Mhm.
Um, and there seems to be kind of a buy-in of these narratives, the meritocracy myth, for example, the illegality and danger of psychedelics. Like
Mhm.
it just seems like we buy into these narratives maybe to keep society's wheels turning. Yeah, I'm just wondering, how do we constructively grapple with these lies in a way that can drive access?
That's a really good question. Like I'm really excited for Justin. I spoke with Justin, and the truth is going to come out about his experience at Iterable, and I think we need more people in power and privilege to help dispel some of these false narratives and myths.
Mm.
Like we
But how do
just,
you get people in power and privilege to do that when it's in their best interest not to? Right? I'll give you an example of what I mean. I was reading someone who talked about having an inclusion session with a group of leaders.
mm,
They were predominantly white men. And ultimately, the person got the question, so look, isn't what you're saying is there needs to be fewer of us at the table?
mm,
Isn't
mm,
that what you're saying? There needs to be fewer of us at the table.
mm,
I think that that's sort of the initial reaction to, we need people in power to open up for inclusion. The
mm.
initial reaction to that is, and that means I need to cede my space.
Yeah,
I need to lose my ground,
yeah,
right? I have a response to that, but first I wonder what yours is.
yeah. Humans don't naturally give up their privilege like that,
Mhm.
right? So it's like I can see how we got to where we are in the world today, and it's a tale as old as time. People want power. They
Mhm.
don't just give up a seat at their table. They don't just willingly give up their privilege. But can you imagine as a world where through the use of psychedelics, there are some people with power and privilege that recognize that they actually do need to do that? And, kind of it can help people identify with a collective versus an individual, like their personal level.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. That once you have this opening with psychedelics and this connection to something larger than you,
Mm,
perhaps it could reconstruct how you see power altogether. That it's simply a resource. It's
mm,
a vibration. It's not about you as the individual. You got this resource so that you could affect many so that you could make space, make room, make a
Mhm.
way for many, right?
Mhm.
My response to this question of, so what does this mean? Does this mean I have to give up my seat at the table? I wish I had been in the room, because I'd been like, dude, seriously? You can't think of anything better than that from a scarcity mindset? How about you build a bigger table?
Yeah.
Like, that's what you can do with power. With power, you can build a bigger table. You can decide that this table is going to be humongous so that there's enough space for all kinds of people to come here.
I love that.
Yeah.
It's like getting them to think beyond the current scarcity mindset that has instilled this initial power grab that exists.
Yeah. And that it's all finite, right? That we're in these zero sum games. I think that for me,
Mm.
with psilocybin, which is that a substance you've engaged in yet? Have you engaged with
A
psilocybin?
little bit. I have a hard time getting the right like amount for myself.
Gotcha.
I'm always like underdoing it because I don't want to overdo it, and I don't think I really get the same. People say you take 3 grams. I don't know. That seems like a lot to me.
I think you take what you need to take, and it may be the case that you build up to
Yeah.
whatever it is that might be a journey dose for you,
Mhm.
right? So that certainly was the case for me. My 2 psilocybin journeys that I've had so far, they were of slightly different dosages.
Mm.
The first one I required more, and the second one was less.
Mm.
In both, what I came to understand and what I came to feel,
Mm.
like really in my body feel, was infinity.
Mm.
It is a remarkable feeling to feel infinity. And for me, then I knew all this zero sum nonsense.
Yeah.
I don't know where this came from, but it's not true.
Mm.
It's not true.
Mm.
And it's interesting because people will then say, yeah, but look, Tammy, they can only hire like one person to be CEO, right? Like
Mm.
only one person's going to get that job.
Mm.
So
Mhm.
40 people apply and only one person gets it.
Yeah.
That seems pretty zero sum, right? It's like,
Mhm.
that's true. Only
Mhm.
one person is going to be the CEO, perhaps for very particular reasons, because the role needs very particular things. So maybe the answer is no for that opportunity, but what other opportunities exist? Like
Mm.
companies can create whatever roles they want, right? And we used to do that at the beginning of tech, right? We had chief happiness officers and chief evangelists. Like we had all kinds of, goofy roles. And I think people just sort of said, well, that's ridiculous. And, there's no utility for that. And we're just wasting money. But I do think sort of coming back to
Mm.
creatively thinking about what actually would expand the value of an organization and
Mhm.
drive the value of an organization, and then make some space for those roles and then bring in some people.
Yeah. Yeah. I often think too about how getting rid of this scarcity mindset in companies, it's like I think about the world and we have a lot of problems to solve. Like climate change comes to mind. We need companies and businesses to be really firing on all cylinders to address climate change, address poverty, address systemic inequalities in all sorts of products and institutions. And we generally have the knowledge and skills to do that. We know how to mitigate climate change. We know how to hire for diversity. We know how to build inclusive cultures. But some scarcity mindset prevents us from being able to do that. We're missing this like shared inclusive consciousness that if we all had it, I think we could actually solve a lot of the world's problems.
Yeah. Yeah. As you're talking, Stephen, the thought that's occurring to me is the scarcity mindset is not an invalid one. It's just primal.
Mm.
And we are beyond being primal.
Yeah.
We have the opportunity now to live much more expansively than that, to be much more creative than that.
Mm.
I think we are underselling ourselves with scarcity mindset. We're underselling our creativity. If the best, when I coach and advise leaders of companies, when they come at a problem out of fear, just the solutions they come to are so limited. I
Mm.
have just I have rarely ever heard a successful, useful solution that started from fear, from this small mind of fear and scarcity. I don't know. Maybe I'm being judgy here.
No, I mean, any Stanford Design School, IDEO, any of these organizations would validate that. I mean, the best solutions come from having an open mind, design thinking, putting all of your ideas out on the table, and then kind of like using diverse perspectives to narrow down on the best one. If you have a zero-sum mindset or a scarcity mindset, the best idea is not going to come out.
No, it's not. In fact, it's going to be killed off.
That's what all the research around, like, you know, how diversity inclusion leads to better ROI. There's all these studies out there. It's not just having the diversity within the org, it's empowering the diversity to actually contribute to ideas. More ideas are on the table, and that's what leads to the better outcome.
Yeah. So I would say with power in mind, because I spend a lot of time thinking about power, and
Same.
particularly power in the workplace. And I would say with power in mind, one of the most impactful and wonderful things people with power can do is to expand, open up the possibility. And what I often see people doing is closing and holding on to what they have, right? Out of that scarcity mindset. I don't know, man. Psychedelics for CEOs?
Yes. I wonder how many CEOs already do.
Psychedelic for the C-suite. Let's start there. Yeah. And not to say that, you know, it's not relevant and important everywhere, but particularly for people who hold power in organizations. I'd love to see psychedelics as a norm for the C-suite. Psychedelic retreats. Can you imagine that? At our offsite, we're going to do a medicine group.
I think they're already doing this in places like Amsterdam, and I know someone that has, you know, where it's, you know, mushroom truffles are legal, and through the lens of leadership development, it can be applied. That's what I get really excited about. I think we're a little bit early to this conversation. We need to decriminalize it and legalize it. And I think a lot of the focus is where it should be, which is around research, around clinical studies, and, you know, the therapeutic and the science behind it. But once it becomes more normalized, I would love like psychedelics for the C-suite. I think they're the ones that need the most help reimagining what is the impact that my company is having on my employees and the world.
Yeah. And if it's not what is my expansive place in that?
Yeah. Don't C-suite leaders think a lot about like the legacy they're leaving behind? Do you think? Shouldn't they? I mean, it's not about consecutive positive earnings calls. That can't be what's going to be on their tombstone.
Yes,
exactly. Right? Like 5 quarters.
5 quarters of consecutive positive earning calls.
You know, no, they're thinking about the impact they're having on the world. And like, if we can help them shape that in a way that is more aligned and attuned to, you know, the goodness of this person and less about the power grab, maybe we would have, you know, better companies, better business ecosystems, happier employees.
It occurs to me maybe a very interesting exercise to do with executives at an offsite is make your own tombstone and put on your tombstone what you would want.
Yep.
And since the majority of C-suite executives are men, I can imagine, you know, some of them might have husband, father, friend, you know, that kind of thing. But yeah, is anyone going to put 5 quarters of consecutive positive earnings on their tombstone? Personally, what I want on my tombstone is, you know, humanist psychonaut.
Yes.
These are some of the things I would want on my tombstone. I wouldn't want to see Psychonaut as an indicator of how I worked and how I developed and how I grew and how I found freedom and how I found joy.
Tammy, I love that.
Yeah. Put Psychonaut on my tombstone for sure.
Done. Don't some people not like that term for some reason?
I'm not sure. And I know that the
Someone was.
psychedelics, what we often refer to as quote unquote the psychedelics community or quote unquote the psychedelics ecosystem,
Mhm.
um, these are very monolithic terms that
Yeah.
would presume then that we're all thinking the same way about these things. But there's a lot of conflicting views, a lot of diverse perspective. There are generations of people who have been working on psychedelics and working in psychedelics. There are waves of newcomers flowing into psychedelics with new ideas and so upstart thinking, etc. So it might be the case that some folks are not in favor of the word psychonaut or don't like the terminology. I've also heard, and I've done some own thinking for myself about
Mm.
using the word psychedelics. When I
Mm.
first started, I used the word entheogens.
Mhm.
And I really feel like that when I talk personally about my engagement with these substances, I talk about them as entheogens, but that is not a term that is widely popularized. And this is a podcast about access, and I don't want to create barriers to access, and our language can create barriers to access, right? So for
Totally.
me, when I thought about, if I'm working on this project of access in this realm, what would help me get to access? What would help facilitate that? And so, my language is psychedelics and psychonaut, but I'm always open to hearing what other folks, think about these things.
I've been like just tapping into all of the debates going on because there's a lot.
Yeah.
Um, I think the interesting one about access is about like the the to what extent is capitalism necessary for increasing access to the things that we are talking about? It's tricky. It's really tricky.
Yeah, there have
I
been
guess
two. There have been
I'll
two
pause recording.
podcasts. Yeah, no, there have been two podcast conversations that we've had
Okay.
here on Keys. One with a venture capitalist,
There you go.
and one with an anti-capitalist.
Mm-hmm.
And what I come to, and maybe this is because of sort of my nature, which is I am by nature non-binary,
Mm-hmm.
not just in my gender identity. I'm coming to understand, because of psychedelics and how expansively I can now think about myself, I'm coming to understand that I'm non-binary, not just in my gender identity, but also just in my way of being. Like I'm not generally a person who is over on this side or over on that side. I am usually looking at all the sides, and I think of it more like a circle. So I'm not on a side, I'm in a circle. And I think that there is utility to examining both the perspective of the anti-capitalist and the venture capitalist in terms of what the contributions to psychedelics can be. I think capitalism gets us psychedelics at scale in a way that nothing else will.
Yep.
I really truly believe that. I believe that anti-capitalism gets us to inclusiveness and access in a way that nothing else will.
Mm.
So we're on psychedelics, people. We can carry dichotomous realities at the same time. We can do that.
Yeah. That's one of the things that psychedelics has really taught me. And as I do consulting work as a DEI and psychedelics consultant, one of my values is to be able to hold multiple truths. Mm-hmm. Like I can look at this capitalist world, capitalism being the strongest like material force in the world, and be like, that sucks. This system is horrible and it's not working, and I'm going to work to change it every day. And I can also hold that, like, I love this world. I have so much fun and it brings me joy and I deserve joy and I get to experience all these amazing things. Mm-hmm. Both of those things can be true. They have to be true. That's how I sleep at night.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's how we get things done in the daytime. Mm-hmm. Right? That's how we get things done.
I don't know. I didn't know that psychedelics was part of understanding your gender identity.
Yeah, I didn't know it either until about 2 months ago, when I started to realize, these millennials have come along and given me a whole new language for describing this experience I've been having as an adult for 30 years, like gender nonconforming and non-binary. And psychedelics has given me the creative capacity
Mm-hmm.
to delve more deeply. And I don't have any fear about my identity, right? So I'm now comfortable to really consider this. So I went to the grocery store like a month ago, and for like, the 95th time this year, someone called me sir.
Mm-hmm.
Someone's always calling me sir. I once had a TSA agent who was holding my license with the F on it, because this is at the time where you can only choose the M or the F. There was nothing else. So the TSA agent's holding my license with a gender designation on it that says female and says, "Where are you going today, sir?" And I didn't answer. And the TSA agent's like, "Sir, I said, where are you going today?" And I said, "If I can't count on you to read my license and understand my gender, how can I count on you to keep me safe as I fly?" And the TSA agent looked at my license like, "I'm really sorry, ma'am. Everything's fine. Come on through. Come on through." Right? Like,
I love that.
I have been getting called sir when I don't identify with sir all of my adult life. Now, what's interesting is I also understand that I don't conform to definitions of woman. And that's because definition of woman is very narrow. It's very narrow. And it's narrow here in America, where we think it's pretty broad, but it's pretty narrow. And I've experienced it with changes with my hair. When my hair is long, I have likely more, what's the word? I'm more likely to have men interact with me in a way that they do not interact with me when my hair is short. Right? Because they're picking up some cue that I personally am not sending off, but they're reading, because I'm just as gay when my hair is long as I am when it's short. But they're reading these external cues and coming to conclusions, right? And so these external cues about who we are they're pretty constrained, right? And so I've been gender misidentified, which is another millennial term. Didn't have that one before the millennials came along too. I'm very grateful for y'all millennials. You brought a lot of, I say this often, you've brought a lot of simplicity to describe very complex experiences. And so now I realize one thing I'll say too. So I've been gender misidentified my entire adult life. And I was always like just pushing against that. And now I realize I don't actually need to push against that anymore, because gender is socially constructed.
Yep.
So I'm not going to tell you what my pronouns are anymore. You decide. I don't need to tussle with you about that, because I'm non-binary. So I have my own set of pronouns for me. I'd love to just get rid of pronouns altogether. That would be my preference. But I have my set of pronouns for me. You decide whatever pronouns you want to use for me. And I'm okay with that. And I mean, really, like, that's just like this psychedelics. Like, I've just relaxed into this identity.
I mean, that is an incredible, like, I don't want to say achievement. Understanding your gender identity is incredibly important. And the fact that you had a tool to do that, I'm so happy. Like, I'm so happy. Like, that's
the thing is for me particularly, I wasn't super conflicted about this to begin with. I was just like annoyed. I know that there are people who have way more conflict around gender identity and sexuality than I have, right? So, I don't want to sort of position this as sort of like a really, I don't know, like a huge resolution of a huge conflict. It was more just a quiet realization and a settling of a conversation now that I don't really have to have with myself or have with society anymore. It's just sort of a quiet resolution, which still is very comforting to me and very freeing to me. But I know that there are folks out there who have, much larger conflicts to resolve around gender.
Well, I'm glad to hear it. It's like you had this experience, and often we have the experience before we have the language. And, I work with a lot of people that are really struggling with understanding and grappling with all of these new terms. To them, they are new terms, and in the training that I often give around terminology, it's like letting people know that these terms that maybe are new to you are affirming the experiences of people that have been annoyed or had even greater senses of conflict. So by understanding and accepting that these terms exist, you're affirming the identities of people around you that have struggled with something like this. And they're like, oh, okay, well, it's not too hard. I guess I'll learn the terms. And then
the language has been like, having the language has been astonishing, right? Like, oh, now I finally know how to describe this thing that's been happening to me forever. And I think having the language too definitely makes it shared. Now this is not my experience only. So it's not like I'm some weird thing. This is enough of a universal and shared experience that we now have words for it.
Yeah.
That's what's really powerful.
Yeah. That's why I get really excited about DEI terminology. And I want to leave people with like a mindset of like curiosity of like, oh, I want to learn more terms so I can affirm more people's identities and experiences. And I want to have a sense of humility so that when I get someone's terms wrong or I misuse a term, that I'm like, oh, I'm willing to learn and get better at it. Like that's the mindset I want people to have. But often people come with it with a sense of like fear of like, I'm going to get it wrong. I'm going to say the wrong thing. They need to be given reasons why it's important and why they should want to learn these new terms.
Yeah. Stephen, as I listen to you talk, I just keep hearing the happy marriage between psychedelics, diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, and justice. I keep hearing sort of the happy relationship that can be developed there, because I know for me, one of the huge benefits of engaging in psychedelics, and it sounds like you have this too, is just this toning down and this transformation of the fear. Like, what if you had something that could take all the uncomfortability that you have around talking to someone whose gender you don't understand? What if you had something that could just turn all that uncomfortability into comfortable curiosity? I have had some really awkward, uncomfortable, ridiculous conversations with people whose gender I couldn't quite compute, right? I have stumbled, stuck my foot firmly in my mouth, offended people. And it was because I was just sort of locked up inside. Like, I don't know what to do with this. I don't know what to do with this. Just yesterday, I had a conversation with a person who is clearly gender non-conforming, maybe gender transitioning. I'm not sure. But the larger point was, I didn't need to know. I didn't need to know what the person's gender was, because the category of gender has actually been broken apart in my brain. It's been sort of just made more elastic. Right. And that, I think, is really the effect of psychedelics. It's not that so much about like my own gender identity. It's that I could get to this flexibility about my own identity because these constructions have been made more elastic and flexible. And so now, when I encounter someone, I don't need because our brains are designed to categorize. They're actually physiologically designed for that. It's one of the first things I learned in anthropology, is that our brains are actually physiologically designed to categorize. That's how we have stayed alive as a species on the planet. Like poisonous, not poisonous, prey, predator, female, male, right? So gives birth, hunts, right? Like that's how we've stayed alive on the planet. But these categories now, and this process of categorization, there's a degree to which it's limiting. I don't know. I feel like it's limiting us. But what do you think?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of things evolutionarily that have served us that no longer serve us anymore.
Yeah. So yeah, it's
Um,
this elasticity now, this elasticity that I'm able to have with psychedelics, where I don't need to categorize so many things now for me
And
to
you're
be able to live into
probably,
them.
with that elasticity, you're probably more open to hearing something that like is new or disagrees with your current understanding of something. Before, like I think a lot of times we listen and we're trying to disprove as we're listening, right? Someone's saying something to us about whenever I hear a lot of like conservative or Republican viewpoints, I catch myself being like, start forming your counter argument, because this person's wrong. And with more elasticity afforded to me through some psychedelic experiences, I'm always like, what is this person is saying that like I actually believe? Or how did they get to that realization that where it makes sense to them? Yeah. There's usually 1% of what someone is saying that I can get behind, at least, And so I, in the past year with COVID, the friends that I've been like connecting with are actually a lot of my like more conservative, like Trump voting friends. And I'm like just understanding their perspectives more. Like, how did you get to that thought? Or like, how does that make sense to you? And I'm actually like able to kind of bridge political divides in my mind.
Yeah. I think that this is a really key point here, that the elasticity makes space and ability to take in something that might be foreign or unknown, or even something that is disagreeable. But at least let me be curious enough to be sure that I disagree with you.
Yeah.
Right? Before I'm just presuming that I'm disagreeing with you.
Yeah. I've never thought of like it being like elasticity, but that's exactly what it is. I think that's a really good way to describe it. So let me circle back to my answer about why people should take LSD. It gives you the elasticity to be able to understand yourself, to be able to understand others. Who doesn't want that?
Yeah. And if you don't want that, then we need to talk.
Yeah.
If you don't want the elasticity, then there's something to that.
There's something to that. Then do it for the healing and understanding why you don't want that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I think, Stephen, the last thing I wanted to chat with you about, and we were talking about it a little bit when we're talking about mental wealth and having that be intergenerational. You and I talked a little bit about kids. Neither one of us has kids, right? So it's still, these are still theoretical exercises for us. And it's interesting, I'm at the time of this recording with you, I'm 52. And I think that, there has been this maybe idea that once you're of a certain age, you shouldn't think about becoming a new parent, right? Why would you become a parent at such, at a certain age? But I also think that notion has been challenged very publicly by celebrities. So George Clooney, for example, who waited until well into his middle age to get married and have children. Robert De Niro had a baby at 71. And I think for me, this has been, and it's not, that wasn't his first kid, but he had a kid at 71. Yeah. And I think for me, this is and again, these things happened before I had embraced for myself the idea of being non-binary. But I think this was sort of evidence of my non-binariness, because I'm looking at these men saying, well, if they can do it, why couldn't I do it? Right? Like, why do the rules for men have to be different for me because I have a female body? I'm not going to give birth to anything, but there are all kinds of ways to have a kid now. Right? So I've been thinking a lot about parenting, and you and I don't know how we got into that conversation, but we were talking about parenting, and you said something like, what are the qualifications for being a parent? Right? Like, does anyone ever know, like, has anyone ever explained what the qualifications are for being a parent?
Not a lot.
Right? And I think for me, like, one of the qualifications would be like, must do psychedelics, or must have like sort of the ability to be psychedelic. So you don't necessarily have to do them, but whether you get there through art or creativity or travel or however you get there, essentially the ability to be open, right? The ability, that seems important to being a parent. And maybe this, it's the ability to be open and conscious. That's what it means for me to be psychedelic, open and conscious.
I mean, wouldn't all parents, I'm speculating, but wouldn't all parents benefit from being more open and conscious? Wouldn't like they raise their kids better?
You are speculating.
Like,
you are certainly speculating
would there
about
be
the
downsides?
Well, I mean, when I think about sort of the way that I was parented, I was definitely command and control parented. And it's the way there are leaders who lead companies with command and control. It's what they're comfortable with. It works for them. So, command and control is not the same as open and conscious, right? These are two different paradigms for wielding power and influencing other humans.
Yeah. I came to the realization that I wanted kids a few years ago. When I was at my company called Culture Amp, where I was the head of diversity and inclusion, we did an event called Coming Out Stories, where every queer person had permission and a place to tell their coming out story in front of the entire office. So we did this in Australia, SF, New York, and LA, and London. And when I was in San Francisco, our VP of marketing told his coming out story, and he now has a kid. And he was talking about how like societal norms dictate this idea of when we should have a kid or who gets to have kids. And the societal norms always told us that like gay people aren't supposed to have kids.
That we're not supposed to be anywhere near children, because God help us all if the children are exposed to gay people.
Right.
Yeah.
And so that with my elasticity, it was like, ooh, maybe I've just been told by society that I don't want kids, and maybe I actually do want kids. And now whenever I do LSD, I haven't done LSD actually in a good long time. I do something else, but I've been thinking about kids. I was on a hike and I saw a family with kids, with one kid, a young kid, and the kid couldn't walk. It was like in the backpack and they were walking for a little bit. And it made me think, fuck, I want kids. Because I was also thinking about my parents, and I was like, I wish I could take my parents on this hike. It was a really intense hike in a different country. And, my mom's turning 70 this weekend. I don't think they would have been down for it. But I was like, I want to have a kid so that they can take me on this hike. And I was just having all these thoughts about kids. And so now I'm realizing, I do want kids. Another psychedelic enabled arc shift.
Yeah, that sounds like that might be a big one coming.
I know, but I don't want to do it by myself. So I'm gonna try to find a partner before I do that.
Yeah. What do you think psychedelics might give you as a parent? Like, do you think that and again, this is theoretical now. Hopefully, maybe one of these days I'll have someone on the podcast for a conversation about psychedelics and parenting. But theoretically now, what do you imagine psychedelics doing to support you as a parent?
Well, again, speculating here, no kids myself, but I think some of the big challenges around parenting, at least people that have come to me for help, is when their kids start to observe some of the inequalities that exist in the world. And parents often are surprised or stuck or inelastic to be able to explain to their child what they're seeing. So someone came up to me, I was doing a talk, this is a few years ago in San Diego, and he just gotten back from DC with, I think it was either his son or daughter, I don't remember. But he was saying, I think his kid was like 6 or 8 or something and said, Dad, why do I see all the Black people taking the bus and all the white people are driving cars? And he was like, huh? Like, what? Like, how do I explain to my child that there's like systemic imbalances in like the transportation system, and like they were stuck. They were like, what was I supposed to say? You know?
Yeah.
And I would hope that psychedelics would help adults like parents come up with really interesting ways to answer this question that like wasn't denying what this child was seeing, because children are seeing and experiencing the world as a biased place, and then hopefully adults would have more of the language to help them grapple with what they're seeing.
Oh man, that is beautiful. That is really beautiful.
I didn't know what to say. I was like, kids. I wonder what other biased kids pick up. I have a pit bull who you saw earlier, and some kids see him as a dog and they're so excited to like, I want to play with this dog. And some kids are terrified of him. And it could be because of his size, or it could be because, I don't know, they picked up on bias. Maybe their parents have always been picking their kids away up from pit bulls. I'm not entirely sure, but kids observe bias very early, and it gets scaffolded very early throughout our entire lives.
Yeah. And keeping in mind, our brains are designed to categorize. So when kids experience that bias, they start slotting that into categories like, oh, that's good, that's bad, that's like me, that's not like me, right? Like they start slotting in those that bias into those categories that could get locked in and could get fixed.
Have you thought about this? Like what skills or mindsets would have changed for you if you were to become a parent?
I have. And I think, when people ask me now if I have kids, I jokingly say, yes, I have two, my inner child who is 5 and my inner child who's 17. And I am parenting both of them on a regular basis now. So I do think that one of the ways I am learning about how I might parent is how I am parenting myself. And certainly I think a huge answer for me in terms of the importance of psychedelics for how I would parent has to do with compassion. Compassion is not something I was raised with. So I didn't know how to give that to myself. And I was very thin on it for other people. But having more compassion, particularly for little ones who they're just in the throes of their primal self. They don't have language and nuance and skills to cope with themselves. And one of the most important things I think adults can do is help kids cope with themselves. It used to be the case that when I heard kids like screaming and hollering and crying, I'd be like, oh my God, someone needs to do something about that. But now when I hear kids screaming and hollering, I think to myself, what is that little one going through? What's that little one going through? There's this beautiful video that has gone around on Facebook recently. I will put it in the show notes. I've watched it like 1,000 times. I feel
What is it?
It's a video of this little girl. She's about 2, and she has smashed her hand in a door. And so she's crying. She's very upset that she has smashed her hand in a door. And so the video comes on and her mother is telling her to breathe. And so the little girl's like, her little eyes full of tears. And then she has to go back to the drama of it. So she starts telling her little 2-year-old words, the door, and then my hand, and then I smashed it. And that's often, I think, where we get stuck as humans, is in the drama of it, right? So she's in the drama of it. And then the mother says, look at me, say, I am strong. Right. And the little girl says, I am strong. And say, I am beautiful. I am beautiful. And then the mother says, say, I am worthy. And the little kid can't even say the word worthy, but she can make the vibration. She says, I am worthy. And then the mother, tells her, to breathe and tells her that she loves her. And then the little girl says, "Thank you, Mama. I love you." I am just undone every time I see this video, because that is how I want to parent myself, and then also be of service to a little human being who's just learning to grapple with all of what they are.
Do you think psychedelics would benefit kids?
This is a very interesting question. What do you think first?
Okay. I've never thought about this until now. So let me amass my thoughts. My first instinct, I'm thinking about myself in my teenage years. I want to say yes, but there was just so much primal hormonal things going on that I wonder if I would have been able to do it safely. I could have certainly used some of the benefits and this elasticity that we're talking about. Spending a few years in the closet, that's not good for anyone for any amount of time. So I'm wondering if psychedelics could have gotten me to a better place of understanding my sexual orientation and things. Like I could have definitely benefited from it. So thinking for myself, I think I would have benefited from it and would have been able to do it in a safe way. I don't think my parents would have condoned it, but that never stopped me from doing things. But I think generally, broadly, I don't know. It's just, I had a pretty okay sheltered childhood where I think I could have handled it.
Yeah. When I was in high school, I was in band, and band probably saved me as a kid. And I remember senior year of band, I was walking through the band room, and I was stomping through the room. I had something going on. And my very good friend of mine at the time asked me, "You're so angry. What are you so angry about?" I don't remember what I answered, or if I had an answer. I don't think I knew. I don't think I knew what I was so angry about as a 16 or 17-year-old. Now I know. I had PTSD. That's what I was so angry about, right? I think that by the time human beings are 16, 17, 18 years old, they've seen enough of the world to potentially undermine their sense of safety, undermine their sense of connectedness, maybe cause some confusion about the contradictions. There's research that says that children don't actually understand that the parent they love and the parent who does something that scares them and hurts them are the same person. That's actually a developmental awareness that we get to. And how do you grapple with that, as a young person? How do you reconcile that? So I do think that there could be some benefit to, I think, very guided, almost like life coaching experiences for young people related to psychedelics. I know that there are cultures where psychedelics are part of coming of age rituals, right? And they're contextualized, and there's a whole community, and there's a whole sort of practice and very clear expectations. So I do think that there are some ways that we could incorporate psychedelics into the lives of young people. I mean, it says something that we've got 12, 13-year-olds on medication. If we could put 12, 13-year-olds on medication, it's actually 8, 9-year-olds. If we put 8, 9-year-olds on synthetic medications, I don't know why we wouldn't consider plant medicines for teenagers.
That is a really good point. I think my initial reaction to to my initial question is like hesitation and fear, right? Of like, I hadn't thought about kids and psychedelics before. That's not allowed now. Like, no, it's like your initial thought. And then you start to think about it and reimagine how it would have helped you or a friend. And then you think about what we are already putting children on these days. You're right. It's worth a conversation.
Yeah. Just an exploratory conversation. I'm not saying we start putting it in school lunch. Just saying, could we open up to this where we could get to a place where we could preemptively help young people cope with mental health challenges or just cope with being in the world so that they don't have to spend their 20s. Like I spent an entire decade just trying to recover a sense of self and get myself on stable ground.
Wow.
If I could have had some guided therapeutic contextualized for my age and my developmental stage psychedelic experiences, man, I could have skipped way ahead way quickly.
Yeah. Right? I'm really grateful that I, had the experiences with psychedelics and relationships and things that I've had in my life. But I think like, man, it would have been helpful to have those things earlier.
Yeah. And my therapist and guide, I had to work through this because I didn't come to psychedelics until I was 52. And I was pretty pissed off about that. Right? Like I have spent half my life not having the elasticity and capacity that I have now. Half my life. Now that when I'm old and creaky and my knees hurt and, now where I'm going to get psychedelics, now I'm going to get all wise and open and like all this possibility, except I'm too sleepy because I'm old now. I have to take a nap. Right. And, we worked through how you come to it not accidentally. There's a place of readiness. My guide and therapist has talked about having young people come into psychedelics and then having them say, actually, I'm not ready yet. Like our brains aren't even fully formed. The prefrontal cortex isn't done until we're 25-ish, right? So, maybe it's useful to have a full sense of self, but there could also be, at least on a microdose level or in a guided sort of ritual setting way, some way to bring younger people into psychedelics. So that they don't have so much cleanup to do. Because, the reality is, adulthood doesn't get any easier as you get older if you don't do some work.
Yeah.
If you do some work, it gets amazing. But if you don't do work, it gets exponentially more difficult.
And then you start to hurt more people around you if you don't kind of heal some of the hurt that you've developed in your childhood.
Yeah. And then maybe you become an executive with a whole lot of power and a whole lot of unconsciousness. And you're acting out a whole bunch of things that you don't know anything about because you didn't have opportunity to go clean that stuff up. And now I'm at work dealing with you and your stuff.
I wonder how many CEOs and people in power are driven by, a need to prove themselves, to overcome the hurt that they've experienced. A lot of CEOs that I know, I think I ever want to be one. It takes a bit of some unhealthy behaviors, I feel like, to get to that level oftentimes.
Yeah, I have to say, I would love to see us, and maybe this is where we sort of bring our conversation to conclusion. I would love to see us change the culture of work so that it is not just normalized, but expected for CEOs and executive leadership to be in therapy, to be in coaching, and to be leveraging all the tools available to them to expand their consciousness and deepen their capacity to connect with their own humanity. I would love to see that 100%. Be standard practice.
100%. I often worry if there's a CEO who has the capability and the means to have a therapist and a coach, and they're choosing not to have those things, I'm like, what's wrong with you? These are amazing tools that help you as a business leader and as a human and as a parent and what other identities you hold. Therapy, coaching, guidance, you shouldn't want to turn those things away.
Yeah, get on board with that.
Yeah.
Well, hopefully you can bring more of that to our professional lives. Stephen, I really appreciate the work that you're doing and the work that you want to do.
Thanks.
And, hopefully we come back together for a conversation about how, hey, Psychedelics is in the C-suite now. Now what do we do?
I hope we get there sooner rather than later.
Yeah. Yeah. For the sake of all of us, our world and all of us, I do hope we get there sooner rather than later.
Yeah.
Yeah. Stephen, thank you so much for joining me. I really, really, really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right. Until next time. That wraps up another episode of Keys to the Kingdom. Thanks so much for listening. Check out the show notes for resources we discussed, and follow the Keys conversation on Twitter at Psychedelics Key. Until we meet again, remember, you are connected, you are love, and the kingdom is yours.